I think that will be very exciting for the pack of wild dogs to see. And to see the trend continuing would mean the ANC and the EFF together stand a chance of dropping below 50% collectively in 2024.
Can South Africa's opposition parties put aside their differences and form a united front against the ANC? This is a question that I posed to Gabriel Crouse of the Institute of Race Relations in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. If you would like to watch the full discussion, you can do so by clicking on the link in the description below. Enjoy. So Gabriel, the CEO-elect of the Institute of Race Relations, John Endres, who also directs the Centre for Risk Analysis, he had an interesting analogy, which is that for a long time, the ANC has been like this grizzled, large buffalo that has roamed the savannah and dominated over its territory. And the assumption was that one day a young lion would come that would threaten the dominance of this old buffalo and take it out. But what instead seems to be happening is that rather than a lion, we have a pack of wild dogs yapping at one another, snapping at the heels of this buffalo, making life very uncomfortable and threatening to bring it down. And I thought this was a very apt metaphor for these elections and possible future electoral dynamics in the country. What are some of your thoughts on the possible role of this broad coalition of opposition parties emerging, and how likely is it that they could take out the ANC?
I think it's a very good analogy. I think it's worth adding, as John does, that the buffalo also walks around with its calf, the young EFF,
Yes.
And that both are really in one group and under attack by the wild dogs, who yap at each other, who will snap at each other's heels, but really do seem to share one foremost enemy. That seems like a sober assessment or a good analogy for where we are, especially in light of recent statements that have emerged from Herman Mashaba and John Steenhuisen about unwillingness to work with the ANC and willingness to work with each other. The doors seem to be opening, but in the course of the week, and I think in the course of the next few years, really, we will see really how committed parties are to that path.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
I think that just on the numbers, there are little wards and even voting districts where you see interesting patterns. I've looked in the Johannesburg Central Business District, Yeoville, Braamfontein, Doornfontein, Westville, around there, and I see the DA returning to its 2011 numbers. So in a lot of these high density, very poor areas, the DA was getting between 3 and 5% in 2011. That climbed to about 7 to 10% in 2016, and it's dropped back to between 3 and 5% this time. So a little bit of a retreat there, but surging up is Action SA, which is taking between 10 and 20, but often between 15 and 20% in those areas. So if you add those two numbers together, that strand of the opposition is coming out much stronger, almost twice as strong in many cases, as it was in 2016. And this is not on the back of a full DA retreat. There are clearly some hardcore supporters living in Hillbrow who have been with the DA and continue to be with it. But there is another dog in the pack. And I think that poses a greater threat to the buffalo walking those streets. The same story can be seen in various rural areas. I looked at where, let me not get too lost in the numbers and zoom out, recognizing other smaller parties, the ACDP, Vryheidsfront Front Plus, the IFP, who have experienced growth, all of them in particular targeted areas where they seem to be speaking to a market that's very encouraging to them, and very firmly opposed to the ANC EFF status quo. I think it puts South Africa in an interesting position, because until now, maybe the headline result should be this: until now, the ANC and the EFF, since the EFF has been around, have commanded a 2/3 majority. together at national scale. And before the EFF, there was one election where the ANC dropped below, but before that, it basically had a supermajority on its own, in the Mbeki era. Now you see that collective drops from around above 66% to roughly 57%. And we will see those numbers change a little bit through the course of the week. But it is a significant drop. So the ANC drops below 50 and the ANC EFF drops into the 50s. I think that will be very exciting for the pack of wild dogs to see. And to see the trend continuing would mean the ANC and the EFF together stand a chance of dropping below 50% collectively in 2024. That would put coalition politics really at the front of everyone's mind. And one question to ask will be, who's top dog? But I think from a general South African perspective, the more important question will be, who wins, the wild dogs or the water buffalo?
All right, Gabriel, the outgoing CEO of the Institute, Frans Cronje, has long advised that South Africa is primed for the emergence of a center-right party. And it seems that Action SA and its leader, Herman Mashaba, are embodying that. It's still early days, obviously, but I think that they performed well beyond many analysts' expectations. What is your view of this new player on the scene, Action SA?
One detail, which I think is interesting because Herman Mashaba was Joburg's mayor, is really a Josie guy, spent a huge amount of campaigning money. I could see it on the streets of Joburg, advertising here. So a particular Joburg story is Jewel City, right next to Joe Slovo, as you lead down from Yeovil Doornfontein into town. There, when Mashaba was mayor, some derelict buildings were condemned. The process was accelerated. They were knocked down. A public-private partnership then put up some low-cost housing with a neat public square with some new chicken nickens on the ground floor, some trees and benches for people to sit on. It's safe, it's clean, it's cheap, it's very nice. And in that voting district, Action SA won, actually. So I think that's a good example of people seeing something that works, coming in part from government and rewarding it. I think that that kind of thing should be encouraged. This is the basis on which people should vote. There are issues with Mashaba's attitude toward foreigners. The next district that I saw in Joburg CBD is more on the west side, where there are less residences, more live-in small businesses that are competing with foreigners. And Mashaba's rhetoric, I think, would have been music to the ears of some of the people I've spoken to there, who hope not to have to compete with foreigners in terms of local trade or small trade. I think that's more troubling. That does speak to a sort of socially more right-wing aspect. I think that there are good there are important problems to address, but there is a concern. Likewise, there's concerns with ACDP's Christian values when it gets into how to think about gay marriage. There are concerns with Vryheidsfront Plus's attitude towards secession. These are differences between the pack, the opposition pack, that I think are going to be important for them to remind one another of in their attempt to maintain their brand identities and distinguish themselves and say, those guys are the baddies, we're the goodies for this and that reason. That all being said, it's important to remember what's standing on the other side of the aisle. And I think that people sometimes bristle at the words National Democratic Revolution, but they oughtn't to. They ought to wake up or open their eyes and consider that the ANC has re-ratified this policy program at every opportunity. The Umrabulo discussion document leading into the pandemic, I think, should be compulsory reading. The animosity to family, to faith, to freedom, Sihle Ngubese would say, to the basic values that do seem to unite most South Africans, that really most of us have in common, and that's borne out opinion surveys commissioned by the Institute of Race Relations, are really antithetical to the views of those who occupy the union buildings and the majority of parliament. And in a profound antithesis, there really is a harsh binary borne out by policy programs like expropriation without compensation, BEE forever, the nationalization of private health, flittering around with pensions, talk of quantity easing, printing money for free, and so on down the line. So I think that as much as there is to divide the opposition, there is more to unite them at the moment.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis and you would like to watch the full discussion with Gabriel Crouse, you can do so by clicking here. And I'd also be grateful if you could subscribe to my other channel that's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.